Hi, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and this week I'm with Devra Prywes of Applicaster, and we are talking TV.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Hi, Devra. Welcome. And Devra, I should mention that you are the CMO and the CPO of Applicaster. We're going to be talking today about OTT and a report that Applicaster has recently put out. But why don't you just before we start off, if you can provide a little bit of context about what the company does.
Sure. So Applicaster has been around for about 12 years. We've seen a lot of change in the streaming video industry, launching not too long after iPhone apps were created. So we really help streaming video companies or video companies extend their brand, extend their digital strategy. Our specialty, we have a platform called Zap. Zap is used by broadcasters and direct-to-consumer broadcasters who might not have a linear channel to reach their audience on the platforms that they use across all devices. We help them build, create, and then manage multimedia apps. We offer a no-code and a low-code solution, so it's really easy to use us, whether or not you have developers.
Okay, so that's who Applicaster is, and we're talking because, again, you have this report out recently called the State of OTT Revenue 2021. Obviously, a very timely issue for the whole industry and for us at TVNewsCheck, particularly because this week we, of course, were hosting a mini conference, a streaming conference on streaming news in 2021 and the state of it. So this dovetails into that very nicely. Now, one of the top lines of this report is that 84% of media executives expect streaming to grow in 2021, not a surprise. Nearly half of them, though, are budgeting for more than 50% growth this quarter alone. So that's a pretty dramatic ramp up, isn't it?
It's huge. And we were looking at, kind of a pithy headline for this report. Is it the second wave of streaming? And we decided that it's really the continued tsunami of streaming. McKinsey released some data early in the pandemic, not even a quarter into the pandemic. And they essentially showed that we vaulted 5 years forward in terms of digital adoption in just a handful of weeks. You had more people streaming more content than ever before, getting more comfortable with streaming across all platforms. You had seniors Zooming, you had, it wasn't just OTT apps. But now we're there. And people are getting really comfortable with these models. Expectations have even shifted over the course of the pandemic, and companies are planning for this growth so that they can monetize their content and reach more of their audience.
So the other major takeaway is that media companies are diversifying their streaming and their revenue models, and they're moving to hybrid models. So tell me more about that. What's behind the thinking of moving into that hybridity?
So that was a really important thing for us to uncover. We, at Applicaster, we offer a variety of payment methods. And in my chief product officer hat, I did want to understand how people are monetizing their apps so that we can be there to serve them. And what we found, frankly, when we launched our study, we gave people the option to choose all that apply when it comes to monetization models. We found that only 13% of the entire group of respondents, we had nearly 100 streamers participating in our study, 13% use only AVOD, 13% use only SVOD. There was some TV everywhere thrown into the mix, but the vast majority are already using hybrid models. And it's because they want to let this audience self-select into the pricing tier and the level of service that makes sense for them so they can engage more people. In fact, we had 19 different revenue combinations pop up in our study.
19 different combinations. What are some of those combinations?
AVOD plus SVOD was the most common, but there's AVOD plus SVOD plus sponsorship plus TV everywhere. We've done a lot of review of the industry. Something else that we put together as a content team are our OTT industry roundups. So we've looked at the big nine, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, et cetera. We've looked at verticals, kids, sports, broadcasters. And we have found that broadcasters were actually I guess like in the toughest spot, but frankly, you can turn that into an opportunity. So we saw a lot of gaps in potential ways to monetize their audience, especially here in the States. TV everywhere is an important business model. That is where you have to be a cable subscriber and then enter in your cable credentials in order to access streaming content. But with more and more people cutting the cord, that audience is getting smaller. And unless these broadcasters give themselves additional ways to reach the cord cutters, the cord nevers, and the growing audience of cord shavers, they're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, yeah. So there were some other interesting stats from the report. One is that 66% will launch apps on more platforms. Are we talking vMVPDs there? What sort of platforms are we talking about?
We were looking more at the standalone devices. So not necessarily licensing content to, some of these aggregators, but more making sure that it isn't just iOS and Android. A mobile only strategy just won't cut it. In fact, we were really surprised to learn, it was outside of this study, just additional research. We were really surprised to learn, even for a vertical like kids, which has so predominantly been mobile phone, tablet driven, the smart TV is now the #1 viewing device.
Really?
So partially it's because LG and Samsung, which are the largest two in this area, LG and Samsung, that the tech has gotten better, the experience has gotten better, things just work. That's the number. Everyone always wants to focus on features, and just first and foremost, it has to work. Video has to stream. You want to reduce that time to viewing. Right? So you can find something. It's about surfacing content and making sure that they can connect quickly. So we see a lot, the smart TV category is the fastest growing, and box and stick is quite large and then growing secondly as quickly.
Okay, okay. So the smart TV manufacturers, are they becoming more important gatekeepers in this whole ecosystem then than they were just a couple of years ago?
They are, and this is also, we give some key takeaways at the end of our report. This is an area I call it a growth hack. Samsung and LG are the least used apps right now. We even saw even when we looked at the big nine, Discovery, HBO Max, they don't have both of those categories covered. So these app stores are less cluttered, and it's an opportunity for additional brands to shine and connect directly with their audiences.
And speaking of that clutter, do you have any insights into how that's playing out with consumers? Are they overwhelmed by what they're seeing? I mean, it's such a complete, almost assault of choice that you have when you enter into the OTT ecosystem.
It's a lot. And this is where I also advise brands to use their entire ecosystem. Sometimes at companies, I helped launch A&E and History Channel on iTunes and the early streamers back in the day. And I know that the way that networks are set up, they can be very siloed. And it's really important to use your entire digital ecosystem to help your viewers find your content in the way that makes sense for them. And also, whether it's not just, all available on these platforms, as your marketing a linear stream, but also to use your email marketing, to use all of these different touch points to let anyone interested in your brand know how they can find it in the way that's right for them.
Another interesting stat from your report, that 57% of respondents plan to create more content for their apps. Yeah. So that's another. Now, that's a tough proposition. I wonder, in terms of the value proposition to viewers, and I'm speaking here to news more than any other category. What is the expectation? What's your understanding of viewers' expectations for finding original, bespoke content on a streaming app that they wouldn't necessarily find on air and linear?
I think it's more of a marketing hook, frankly, and take category out of it. If you think about the basic pillars of what would make someone choose your brand over another on the platform of choice, first, you need to be available to them. Then you need to be able to enter that consideration set. And then when people, do go jump through various hoops to download your app, open your app, potentially enter in some login credentials, you need to give them that value to stay. So if you have a large library of content, I don't know that you need to make yourself crazy worrying about exclusive content. Brands that have done this well, I have Paramount Plus. I've really enjoyed watching some really great programming that just doesn't happen to be available on CBS. but I found it in the app. I don't know that it is what made me stay, but it's really, it's this time to value, this time to viewing for the user. You need to help them find content that they want to watch, and then make it easy for them to do so. And I think those are just the first magic bullets. The reason that we hear so much, right? We hear about Netflix and HBO Max. All of these companies are investing billions of dollars in content, but that's because they need to keep their viewers returning. It's a land grab for eyeballs. And the first step, frankly, if you are just looking at launching some apps, start there, and then you can iterate.
You keep coming back to UX though, and that usability and how important that is. So has the industry evolved enough that we've solved for some of those key UX problems that maybe bedeviled OTT apps at the beginning for the first couple of years? Are we now, do we have models out there that we can point to that are really, really good at this?
Everyone is doing better. At Applicaster, we aren't a CDN. We are, later in that delivery stream. But the tools are in place. And I think that people very often, when they come to us, they're worried about, the latest WYSI feature. And we're like, let's back up and first make sure that you have the building blocks in place to at least like have your video perform as expected. And also, I know that, it's very easy to let perfection get in the way of done. To kind of think like a tech company, it's also important just to get something out there, and then you can iterate and experiment and make changes over time. This is something we always advise customers and the industry on. So the very first thing is to make sure that, people can find content they want to watch. It's organized in a intuitive way. And then that it just works seamlessly before you start adding in, mashups and like crazy recommendation engines. Good UI is invisible. People don't even realize they're experiencing it. They only recognize bad UI.
When there's a problem, exactly. I'm curious, do you find on streaming options where you have a VOD menu and a linear feed, that the quote unquote live experience, which is scarcely actually live, do you find our audiences gravitating more to the linear feed as opposed to the VOD, or do you have any stats or information around that?
I don't. I don't have hard data, but I know that our apps support both. Our customers use both. And it's really about making sure that people, if they want to find something that's live, it's about making sure, again, you're using your whole ecosystem. Use a push notification to even remind them to tune in to the TV device, not to get too siloed, device by device. And to make it, so when they do jump in, that they can catch the beginning of their programming. So my recommendation would be to put your live content at the top.
Right. I just asked because I've heard anecdotally from so many news organizations that overwhelmingly their audiences are gravitating toward the live feed and not VOD so much.
So for news, I would imagine that's huge.
Right. Lastly, I want to just talk about the implications here for local television and for station groups. I mean, we're often talking about the bigger platforms, but many, if not most, of local stations have their own apps. And their product appears on numerous other platforms via MVPDs as well. So I just wonder, what are some of your thoughts about the key takeaways they ought to be gleaning from this study?
So a few things, and then there's also advice outside of this study that I think could be good for station groups, because they are in a unique situation where together they have great scale, and it's a slightly different opportunity for them. But from this study, I think that it is important to not get stuck in yesterday. So much of emerging media is kind of anchored by what we're used to. I used to work in ad tech before this, and I remember as YouTube added the skip ads button after the 5 or 6 second mark, and everyone was in an uproar. And then the industry learned, because they were used to 30s, 60s, 15s, suddenly 5 or 6 seconds to connect and engage an audience was terrifying. But then the industry learned, right? We can't dig our heels in and stop tech and stop progress. The consumer is really in the driver's seat, and they want what's convenient for them. And good ads get seen, bad ads get skipped. And it's been amazing. Like now, if you go onto YouTube, you can see a lot of information shared in 6 seconds. So don't get kind of hung up on what you're used to, but be open to experimenting. I like to say, when it comes to monetizing an app, you are limited only by your own creativity. So one of the things that I've observed, because we do work with all of these different verticals. And, it's getting very interesting in the direct-to-consumer space, brands without a cable network. We're working a lot with music platforms, with sports teams, not just sports networks. Sports has been very interesting, largely because they've really been hamstrung from the rights perspective. So individual sports teams very often don't have the rights to their live matches. So some of them create their own live event. Well, actually, no, live events doesn't even need to be in quotes. Sometimes pre-recorded things can be positioned as live, but what they'll often do is they can still film interviews with their players that are live. It's just not the match. Or they do a lot of really wonderful things. Advertising is very hard for a sports team because they have sponsorships involved, they have exclusivity. I really don't understand why broadcasters aren't doing more with sponsorships. When it comes to an app and just changing out a content feed, look for a brand, whether you're developing it in-house, whether you're looking for a vendor or an agency. There's a lot of different ways to launch an OTT app. See how easy it is to change up a feed. Back in the old days when you had a home screen takeover of the website, you can do that on your app. You can change the colors, add logos, add a whole content rail brought to you by Jiffy Lube, and then, show all their branded content. Product placement, using the individual item cells of an app as a billboard. These are all opportunities that just aren't available on network TV. So to think of the various ways to use the digital screen as your real estate.
So underutilized, a lot of underutilized real estate then is what you're saying.
Absolutely, because if everyone is really just thinking of, what we're used to, which is, in the video world, maybe pre, post, or mid-roll, there's a lot of other types of content that are available. Lots of other types of monetization vehicles.
And not just a takeover or sponsorship necessarily of the whole app, but maybe even just subsets of the app, right? Just channels inside of it. And I've talked to organizations that have set up whole channels around, subset channels around a specific sponsor too, and have had success with that.
Absolutely. These, if you kind of think of the real estate of an app and of UI as just modular building blocks, these are things that can be mixed and matched. And then, of course, the tried and true are advertising, right? Advertising is king. In our study, we saw that 2/3 of brands, plan to continue using advertising, but most likely in a revenue matrix, in a revenue mix. But advertising helps bring the cost down or grant free access, which opens all sorts of doors to reach. So again, it's about being accessible to an audience, making sure that the audience can use you, which is a big problem with TV everywhere only models, and then making sure that you have the option that's right for them to self-segment into. So you can experiment with all sorts of different pricing models. Hulu does a great job with this. In the sports world, we've seen some apps have different subscription prices for different sports, all within the same app.
And on the advertising front, just one last thing. Recently, I've had someone from NBCU on here talking about the new ad units that are available on streaming. And there's a real novelty there. A lot of moving away from typical types of units and product placement and using QR codes and sort of sophisticated, evolved models of advertising. Do you see those being adopted? Now, those are going to be available to the NBC owned and operated stations, but with other groups, do you see that kind of advertising becoming more widely available in the next year or two?
Yes, I see everything becoming widely available. Anything related to making money tends to scale. That moves quickly. But it's also a good reminder. We use QR codes a lot on our TV device. It's a good reminder to remind people that what are limitations for certain devices, if you have to enter a password, up, down, right, left, using a remote control into a TV, it can be pure torture. But you can easily take a picture of a QR code and then transfer that exercise to your mobile phone or a website or something that makes it easier. I'm sure we'll see lots of cross-device monetization come into the future as well.
Okay, well, good stuff. Devra Prywes with Applicaster, new report, the state of OTT revenue 2021. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
Cheers.